Hey, Matt, would you check and see if I'm on?
Okay, it's about that time to commence to begin to start. Or whenever you're ready. That's really the most important thing. If you have an empty seat next to you, maybe raise your hand so we folks can find a place. Oh, there's seats in the back, I guess. So, welcome to everybody on live stream. We're just now getting started, and we're going to have a special prayer request first that you can take part in with us on live stream. We want to pray for Connor Buckley, Jim and Laura Buckley's nephew, who had the skateboard accident a couple of weeks ago. He was supposed to be out of the chemically induced coma by now and be recovering, and they've had to either keep him like that or he hasn't actually pulled out of it yet, and there's still some inflammation, still in very critical condition, and they asked for prayer for Connor tonight, so if you keep that in mind, we'll pray in just a minute, but if you think about it during the evening, pray for him as well. And Mo Bowman's, was it his sister?
Yeah, all of his sisters have cancer now.
All of Mo Bowman's sisters now have cancer, and I'm assuming he'll be going up to visit them soon?
I don't know.
But pray for Mo. Mo was my youth director when I went to church here back in 1971, 72. Dinosaurs were still roaming the earth at that time. A long time ago. All right, let's have a word of prayer, then we'll look over a couple of questions that came in, and then we'll get started with tonight's study. Now, if you can possibly think of a good question to ask by the end tonight, we should end with enough time to try to answer some of the questions. But if you don't have any, that's fine. But they might come up the next 2 weeks anyway. But keep your brain energized. If you got to pinch the person next to you or have them pinch you to keep you awake, please feel free. Mike?
How's Sharon Bailey doing? You haven't mentioned it.
No updates yet. So as I get an update, she hasn't had her test or her next visit.
Okay.
All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care over those who are injured, and those who are sick, and those who have special needs. And we do pray for Connor Buckley and the entire family as they deal with this traumatic interruption and event in their whole family's life with Connor's accident and the near-death state that he's in at this moment. We pray that you will use the doctors and the nurses and the protocols and procedures and therapies, whatever it is that they're trying to do to keep him strong and healthy so his brain can recover from the trauma and be restored to health. That you'll guide them, you'll bless the family with faith. If there are any unbelievers in the family, that this will be used by you to bring them to Christ, and use Jim and Laura and Matt and Kelsey as witnesses to that family during this time. We also pray for comfort for Mo as he has the news about his sisters, and that you will be able to pray for them in earnest and pray for their grace and their comfort. And we thank you for the faith that that family has. And for Sharon Bailey, as she prepares to go to her next appointment to find out what is going to take place next, that you'll give her a sense of grace and peace and calmness and serenity in her heart, and keep her body strong. May you bless tonight's study in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, a couple of questions came in via email. And I'm sure everybody here will identify with the questions. But the first one is, if God allows bad things to happen, why should we pray to Him? And it's sort of a 3, 4, 5-pronged answer. And number one would be because He commands us to. So in everything that we do in our life, whether we understand it or not, or we see an immediate application, the number one reason is to be obedient. So God commands us to. Number two would be because He's good, and He's benevolent, and He's faithful, and He's merciful, whatever He allows into our lives must be for our best and must have a good reason behind it. And one of the reasons could be to prompt us to pray to Him, which He commands us to do, and the suffering or the hardship draws us to Him. One of it could be to enhance our faith by knowing we We are aware of our need. He can meet it. We request it. He meets it, and that enhances our faith, and we share it with others. And there can be 1,000 other reasons, but whatever it is, because of who He is, if He allows something into our lives, it's because it's for a good that you and I cannot see. And third, because praying to Him when things aren't going right or don't make sense is a great expression of faith, and faith is what pleases God. In Hebrews, we are told without faith, it is impossible to please God. So you flip that, with faith, it is possible, which is an amazing thing if you think about it, that the God of the entire universe can actually be pleased by what we do if we do it in faith, or if we say it in faith, or if we feel it in faith. So that doesn't necessarily answer the question without debate, but it is an answer to the question that why should we pray to Him? Because He commands it, because it's beneficial to us, it enhances our faith, it increases our dependence upon Him, it becomes a witness to other people, and it's an expression of our devotion to Him. Another question was, is there an inherent patriarchy in Christianity and other major religions? And I would say yes, there is, and there's a paternalism as well. And there's a couple of reasons why, two major reasons. One is, if God is as the Bible portrays Him, God is masculine. Now that doesn't mean God's male, but God is masculine. And He presents Himself in masculine terminologies. He's referred to with masculine words. So that's really who God is. The religions of the world that all come from the same stock of human beings, Adam and Eve and then Noah, they would reflect that knowledge that was known to all of us right after the flood, that God is masculine. The other forms would be out of rebellion, making God a woman out of rebellion to the God who was masculine. But most of the religions of the world, because of the influence of Judeo-Christian thought, as well as Muslim, which is an extension of it's a perversion, but it's an extension of Judeo-Christian. God is masculine in those. Buddha and Confucius are masculine. The most powerful Hindu god, Shiva, is masculine. So there does seem to be even if there's female gods, like in Greek and Roman culture, who is the greatest god? It's Jupiter or Zeus. It's a male. So paternalism and patriarchy is sort of inherent in most of the world's religions, except for those that are involved in the occult and mysticism. They tend to lift up the female, Sophia, the mother god, goddess of earth. The naturalist religions tend to have a female essence. And even in cultures, like many Native American tribes are matriarchal. And so even in matriarchal cultures, because of physiology, throughout history, males have been the strongest of the two. They've been the providers, the protectors, the hunter-gatherers. And then what we experience here in life, we tend to project upward to understand God. And what God is tends to reflect down here on earth, and we live that out. So I think the patriarchy and paternalism is sort of inherent, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be taken completely out of context, as even in many Christian environments throughout history, people have taken that for men to be completely in charge and overlord their wives, and the wives are nothing more than a house servant to the husband. That would be a perversion of the way that the Bible would present male leadership in the home, or even God's paternalism over us. And paternalism is a bad word in today's culture. Even in bioethics, the field that I'm often involved in at the hospital and in conferences, paternalism is not a good thing. They don't think. And paternalism is a parental viewpoint towards somebody who has a need, and you know what's best, and you tell them what's best. And that's considered condescending, it's considered insulting, it's considered sometimes even oppressive and intrusive. The better approach is to lay out the options and let them make their decision, and don't be paternalistic. But in a family setting, in a real life setting, we often need somebody to tell us what's right or what's best. But in certain circles, it's considered a bad thing. So let's look at the sheet tonight, which is Theodicy. And I have a little great illustration that I got off Ravi Zacharias' video on this that I thought was really quite clever. He said, how do you look at bad things? How can you call something bad luck or good luck when you don't know the eventual outcome? He said in a Middle Eastern culture, when a man in a village, he has 1 or 2 horses, and one of his horses runs off. And the neighbor comes and says, "Oh, what bad luck. Your horse ran off." I say, "Yeah, what's bad luck?" But the horse comes back, and he brings back a herd of horses with him, 5 or 6 horses with him. And the neighbor says, "Wow, what good luck. Your horse brought back 5 horses." He goes, "Yeah, that's great luck." So the son then tried to break one of the horses to ride it and fell off and broke his leg and his arm. So the neighbor said, "Oh, what bad luck. Your son broke his leg because of the horses that came back with the horse that ran off." He said, "Yeah, that's bad luck." And then the junta, or the jihad people, came into the village to recruit warriors for their jihad. And they didn't take his son because he had a broken arm and a broken leg. And the neighbor says, "What good luck that your son's arm and leg are broken." So luck and goodness are interpreted by eventual outcomes that you and I cannot see. So when we look at that question, why does a benevolent, all-loving, all-powerful God allow or direct, however you want to theologically grasp that, into your lives? What is it? We don't necessarily know what is good or bad, because there's a purpose behind it all. And God has taken us somewhere, and what we interpret to be a bad thing might very well be a good thing. You can see it in the story of Job, certainly, but in the story of Esther. Esther was engaged to get married to somebody. When King Ahasuerus had a fight with his wife, Vashti, and because she humiliated him, he divorced her. So that's a bad thing. And he sends out a message. He wants to look at all the women in the country and pick some wives out of that. And so Esther gets taken into the initial beauty pageant. If you consider Donald Trump and Miss USA, same kind of thing. It was going to be a beauty pageant for the king. That's a bad thing. Her engagement got called off, and she's now in the king's court. And then the keeper of the harem takes a shine to her, and he's a eunuch, so he's no threat, but he likes her, and he keeps her protected and makes sure she gets good food and sort of teaches her what to do. So that's a good thing. But then she actually gets chosen as the queen, as the wife of a pagan, God-dishonoring, violently ruthless king. Well, that's got to be a bad thing. And then Haman rises up in power. And Haman is a man who has a long time history, going back for maybe 400 years to his relatives who hate the Jews. He devises a plot to kill all the Jews. He implements it, gets the king to sign it, which is the bad thing. But the king doesn't know that Esther is a Jew, which is a good thing. Esther comes in and she's able to save the day. And Haman gets killed and all the Jews get to protect themselves. But all through that story, there's bad things, good things, bad things, good things. It's the story that's good, not necessarily every element in it. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So here's the first phrase on your sheet. "But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God." I put that in there because that's one of Job's early statements. And it's not one of arrogance and defiance. It's a statement of naivete, of lack of awareness of what's really taking place. All he sees is, this is ridiculous. I lost my family, I lost my home, I lost my sheep, I lost my donkeys, I lost my video game set, I lost everything. Why would this happen? I'm going to talk to God. I put that in there because oftentimes we take that same stance. So this is a thought just to keep in mind as you go through this. Job endured great suffering and loss under the sovereign direction and permission, because the permission was granted in the story, of the omnibeneficent, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent God. And I put that in there because whatever your theology is, we have to accept that fact because it's true, and then realize that might also apply to us. Not to that extent. I don't know if any man has ever gone through what Job did since that time, but what Job went through in some way, that same principle could happen to you and me. So number one is the paradox. Psalm 84, 11 through 12. "For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man who trusts in you." The paradox is what happens in Job. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. So in one sense, we have this promise that God will give grace and glory to, and will hold nothing good from those who walk uprightly. Then we have the story of Job who walks uprightly, yet that's not what happens to him. So that's a paradox. That appears to be a contradiction, but it's not. And it's one of the beauties of Eastern thought, which is a reflection of the nature of God, that in those paradoxes that can't be explained, you really see the divine. You see that, that God is greater than our principles that we apply to things. So the providence is Romans 8:28 through 29. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Oh, I didn't advance the slides. No wonder you're looking at me like, what's going on? All right, I'm sorry about that. That's the verse. There's who said that. That was good. The paradox and the providence. All right? That God providentially directs things that you and I cannot see and cannot understand. To what extent? That's the big question. The next thing is the problem. Job 1:7-8. The Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on all the earth, a blameless and an upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" And then later on in chapter 42, the Bible says his counselors, they consoled him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him. So we have the paradox, we have the providence, now we have the problem. It is God who institutes this. God initiates this. Now you could say, well, not really, because Satan is only walking around trying to find somebody to play with. God just goes along with it. But God initiates it in Job's life. Job was doing just fine. God is the one who offers him as an opportunity for Satan to prove his case. Next we have the parameters that God controls. Job 1-12. 1:12. The Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." Now this is an interesting aspect of the story, because when that little restraint changes, Job's attitude changes too. And it changes next to, and the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So the first parameters were, touch anything you want, but don't touch him. And Job survives all that, proves faithful, and Satan comes back and says, "Yeah, but you're doing this for him." He said, "Right, you can touch him, you just can't take his life." So the parameters shrunk down some, focusing in on Job. And that's where the real challenge comes in for Job, which we'll see in a minute. So then we have the perspective. Job 1:21. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Every time I read that word naked, I have a difficult time because I pronounce it naked. And I've been mocked for so long for saying naked that whenever I see it, I have to stop and get the A sound out, because I'm a Midwesterner, and in Oklahoma we said the word naked. But it's naked, evidently, to you Yankees.
Some of us are Yankees.
So even Southerners say naked? Or naked?
Naked.
13:15, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And then 19:25, "For I know that my Redeemer lives." So in this process, Job initially has a perspective that sort of dips and then it comes back to the surface, and then it goes beyond that at the end of the story. But his initial perspective is, it wasn't mine in the first place. God can do what he wants. It's his. He's in charge. And that's his initial response. But it gets worse when his body is attacked. Next is the promise. Job 5:17-19. "Behold, happy is the man whom God corrects. Therefore do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. For he bruises, but he binds up. He wounds, but his hands make whole. He shall deliver you in 6 troubles. Yes, in 7, no evil shall touch you." Now that's not a literal mathematical equation. That's not God saying, "Yeah, I'm going to let you go through 6 things, and on the 7th one I'll always deliver you." It is a Middle Eastern idiom for God will control it all and you'll come out fine in some way, shape, or form. That when the whole thing is said and done, you will be fine. That's what the 6 and the 7, like the 6 days and the 7th day he's finished. That combination of 6 and 7 doesn't mean you can count out, oh, that's the 5th bad thing, the 6th bad thing. The next one is going to be great. I'm going to be out of here. That's not a secret formula for survival. It's a principle that God will always be faithful through the process. The position, Job 38, 1 through 4. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Because earlier Job had said, I would speak to the Almighty. I want to reason with God. So Job, God is saying, you've done that. Now you sit down. You're going to answer me questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. And that's just the introduction to his 3-chapter speech to Job, which is powerful, humbling, inspiring, soul-crushing. But we are our strongest when our needs are our weakest. When we're no longer holding on to our own resources, is when we really, truly realize God is the one who has the resources. And in some ways that we never really appreciate until later. But one way we don't understand, we're made strong in our weakness, which is why he chooses that. But God's position is, your complaints might be valid from your point of view, but sit down and be quiet. I have something bigger to show you, and it's me, is his answer. So the product, Job 40, 3 through 5. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. I had heard of you by hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself. That doesn't mean he hates himself. It means he's no longer depending and trusting and looking to himself. I abhor myself and I repent in dust and ashes for exalting my will close to yours. That's seen in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 9, when Paul asked God 3 times to remove his affliction. Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Now, Paul's life is another example of somebody on the outside who, from our criteria and standards, is certainly worthy of the Lord answering his prayers. This is possibly the greatest evangelist of all time, at least a foundational evangelist for all that happens afterwards. The Apostle Paul, he was faithful, he was true, he endured a martyr's death. He faced death numerous times in his ministry, was always courageous, always said the right thing. And but God said, no, I'm not going to do that for you. Actually, what he's saying is, I have something better for you. My grace is going to sustain you, and you're going to know me a little differently. You're going to know me better. Because it's probably a pretty heady thing to say to a demon, go out, and the demon flees. To touch somebody and they heal. And you've got these powers that might get to your head as you're traveling around and people start coming to you and wanting to touch you and talk to you. And he said God sent this messenger of Satan, which may have been an idiom for pain or suffering, but God did it. And I asked God to take it away. God said no. So in our lives, we have to keep in mind Job and Esther and Paul and many others, Daniel, the lion's den, and others, that God often leads us into hardship and he brings us out the way that he wants to bring us out. Now, if you look at Hebrews chapter 11, the great Hall of Faith chapter, all those stories of all those heroes of faith, but how does the chapter end? People who get sawn in half. People who are fed to the beasts. People who live in caves and dens and wander about in sheepskins and don't have any clothes and any food. They're in the Hall of Faith. So sometimes your greatest expression of faith is simply holding on to God as you survive the hardship, and that's just as valuable and just as rewarding and just as acknowledged by God as the Daniel who stands up and goes to the lion's den. We're impressed by the feet. God is pleased by the faith. And you can show faith even in failure. So when you look at these stories, keep in mind that they might not apply in the extreme to you. Like you might not be able to actually diagram out this is exactly what's happening to me, but the principle's still the same. All right, so here's some observations. Job initially responded with faith. In all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now notice what chapters it is. It's chapter 1 and chapter 2. God doesn't say this later on. We're going to see the incredible grace that God shows. Did I say Jonah? I didn't know. Okay, I said Job. I don't think I have the slide yet. Yes, I did. Thank you. Right. So he initially responded with faith, but we're going to see how that changes and how God responds to it. Next, Job eventually cursed his birth. Now, I guess I could ask you to raise your hands as a form of testimony, but don't. I just want to ask you, how many of you have ever cursed the day you were born? You got to be pretty down to do that. You got to be pretty depressed. Pretty much not having a whole lot of faith floating around if you're cursing the day you were born. Listen to what he says. After this, Job opened his mouth. Now, we're only in chapter 3 when he does this. And he cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, may the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. So even 9 months earlier, I don't want to just wipe out the day I was born. I want to go back 9 months. When somebody first heard I was here, get rid of that night. That wasn't a good night. And my birth wasn't a good day. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Oh, that I had perished and no eye had seen me. Now, if you've never been there, then you've done better than Job so far. If you've been there, you're no worse than Job. What's interesting is this is not an indication of a lack of faith. It's doesn't make you a recipient of God's judgment because you are in anguish. God made each one of us emotional creatures. He gave us tear ducts for a reason. He made us laugh for a reason. Why do we laugh at silly things and cry at sad things if we're supposed to always have positive faith? We should never even be affected by what happened. We should just walk along like, this is the day that the Lord has made. While bullets are flying and bombs are going off. But we react to stuff because we're human. God made us like that for a reason. So he doesn't condemn Job for this. But it gets worse. Now the next slide. Job eventually longed for death. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for, that it would please God to crush me, that he would loose his hand and cut me off. You ever been there? I've counseled many people who've been there. I've never been there myself, but I've been there with people. I know I've been there with believers. I've been there with people who at one point in time had a very vibrant, positive faith, who through life circumstances have brought them here where they can't come up with anything in their life that feeds their soul, and they're just empty. And their best solution is to end it and go ahead and go be with the Lord. I counseled a man years ago who lost everything, pretty much. And he was on a bus. Well, he had worked it all out. He was going to kill himself the next day, and he really thought, this is the best for everybody I know, for me to be gone. And working that out, he had peace. He had resolved the problem, which is one of the indicators of somebody about to commit suicide. All of a sudden they're depressed and in despair, and they come out of the room and they're bright, happy, and shiny. They resolved it. And it's going to end for them tomorrow. That's one of the indicators. Well, he did that, but the Lord happened to direct me to him right before he did. And he refrained from doing that. Next one is, Job vehemently complained. Not just complained, but vehemently, which is just one of those interesting words. Therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. So he's talking to some people here who are trying to sort of encourage and jab him at the same time because he's been Mr. Perfect all along, and now he's finally had some suffering, so they're sort of enjoying that. And his response to him is, leave me alone, shut up, I'm not going to be cheerful, I'm not going to rejoice, I'm not going to be blessed and warmed and filled, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm confused, and I'm dying here, and I wish I could go ahead and end. So that's where he went. But it got even worse. He felt abandoned. Chapter 23, verse 8 and 9. Look, I go forward, but he's talking about God. He's not there. Backward, but I can't perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. Have you ever been there? When you really come up against something that is just not too bad, you don't even know what to do, and you're looking for God, but he seems to be hiding. You know here, he's there, but he's working over here, you can't see it. So you turn there, you know he's working over there, but you can't see him. If you turn around to see if he's following, he's not back there. Now that's an emotional, it's a theological struggle, it's a spiritual one as well, but it's born out of anguish. And the anguish that brought Job to this point, it wasn't the death of his family. It wasn't the loss of all his flocks. It wasn't the death of his servants. It was when his body got touched. So please keep that in mind for your own self. You are probably most susceptible when your own body is what begins to falter. Because we can try to act like our spirits transcend our bodies, but they don't till a later time. They're intrinsically tied. I've never had an out-of-the-body experience, but I think from my spiritual vantage point, theological perspective, and my identity with God, if my spirit leaves my body, that's going to be called death. I don't practice occult principles where I know how to send up an ectoplasm or my spirit on an astral plane. I don't know any of that. So if my spirit leaves, I'm dead. So my body wants to hold on to it. And my spirit sort of wants my body to stay healthy. Because my spirit might want to do something, but my body can't get there. I can't send my spirit on over there and get it done when I can't get out of bed. So you might not, until your body's been touched, you might not really know how weak you truly are until your body's touched. Job was the greatest in all the East. He was a man of great faith, loved God, served God. He even stood there with his head up and said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, when he lost everything. But when his body's touched, it's, I don't want to live anymore. I'm not mocking him. I'm trying to reveal that's how severe the attack on the soul is when your own body is suffering. So when somebody's going through that, please show nothing but compassion. Don't try to correct them. You might get, just say to you what Job said. All right, so Job testified to the true depth of wisdom in chapter 28. He's come through this thing and he's working it out. And he's about to have his encounter with God. For it says, for where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living, and concealed from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say, we have heard a report about it, but that's a humorous phrase. Like the birds of the air are saying, we've heard about wisdom, it's somewhere, but we don't know where it is. We've all heard about this thing that exists, but nobody can find it, wisdom and truth. Death and destruction say, they know about it. God understands its ways, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth, and he sees under the whole heavens to establish a weight for the wind, and apportion the waters by measure. When he made a law for the rain, and a path for the thunderbolt, then he saw wisdom and declared it. He prepared it. Indeed, he searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. So from God's perspective, all that Job is wrestling with as the why did this happen to me, God is saying that's not really the issue. The real issue is you and me. Seek me, know me better. I'm wisdom, I'm truth, I'm understanding. And I've been there numerous times in my own life where I'm perplexed by what's taking place and what to do to fix it. And some of the problems are completely unfixable, and I find that most of them are completely out of my realm of ability. Anyway, all the worry and all the fret I was doing was really a waste of time because I was having no impact, no effect on the outcome. Well, that's a part of what life is. It's humbling. It's one reason why I think men mellow with age. They begin to realize their limitations and begin to accept it better than when they're young. And then a little side note here that I just think is interesting, what God did for Job. Remember I talked about God's grace that he showed Job when Job responded with vehement complaining, cursing his birth, cursing his conception, wishing that he was dead, wanting to challenge God. I don't see you anywhere, wherever I look. All that attitude coming out of Job, God didn't strike him down for it. God didn't judge him for it. God just corrected him. He just altered his sight a little bit and said, I may or may not answer your questions, but here's the answer I want you to think about. And the answer is me. What I have done. What I did when you weren't even born. Before your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was born, I did all this. You can't even explain it. You can't even comprehend it. I did all this. This is who you're talking to. This is who you're challenging. And then this great God, who has every reason to go and just squish Job, he doesn't. He actually gives Job back everything and more as a little reminder of his grace. But this is the one I think is pretty amazing. Job's lament, passionate lament, was achieved. In chapter 19, verse 23, he said, "Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book." Now, do you think when Job's going through this and he's scraping his sores with potsherds, and he's sitting there, he looks up lovingly at his wife to get the word of encouragement? "Honey, you got any words? Curse God and die, you stupid." That's how bad it got. Right? And he laments this thing, "Oh, that my grief was written down and my words were in a book." Do you think he really thought his words were going to make it into a book that would be read 3,000 years later? But his words were written in a book. And you and I are discussing his words and what happened in his life all these many centuries. There is probably nobody's personal trauma that has affected more people in history than Job's. He had no idea when that was going on, of what God was doing. So, is that just pride, wanting to have your story written in the book? No, what Job was saying, that there has to be some meaning in this. There has to be a purpose in this. And it's so profound, there's got to be something big. Somebody needs to tell the story. It was a thirst for significance, for meaning. And then God puts his story in the Word of God. If you want to be written down somewhere, Sarasota Herald Tribune is nice. But it's nothing compared to your name and your story being in the Word of God. Amazing. All right, here's a few things. I don't know if they're on your note sheet, I forget, but God not only, now these aren't necessarily encourage you. These aren't necessarily cheerful thoughts. They're just real thoughts. God not only could have stopped Job's suffering from occurring, he also could have refrained from suggesting Job as the candidate for Satan's experiment. So this good, loving, kind, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present God could have stopped this process at any time. And he could have prevented it by not even suggesting Job. It's just one of those things you got to keep back there, which tells you God is beyond your grasp. He's inscrutable, beyond understanding. Everybody got that written down as best you can?
You have another sheet.
Are there blanks?
Yeah.
There you go. All right, next one. The suffering that was directed at Job by Satan, with God's permission, included suffering afflicted upon Job's family, servants, and animals. That's just a side note, because Job's suffering was pretty bad, but he's not the one who got zapped by lightning. He wasn't the one in the house when the wind came and killed him. He wasn't taken off and captured by marauding bands of thieves. Other people, other living things suffered for the purpose that God was giving in Job. And I can't necessarily base this in any deep theological foundation other than what I know of the hand of God. But I look at the Holocaust in that way. 7 million Jews and maybe another 2 to 3 million Christians and no telling how many gypsies and all that, but millions died in the death camps. Not to mention, I think, 50 million in the fighting itself? It's a ridiculous number. Israel as a country didn't exist prior to World War II. All of that human suffering for one moment in an entire world that seemed to have an inbred or inherent hatred of Jews, for just a moment there was enough sympathy for the people of the world to say, we're going to let you have your country. You can come back here and live. There's no way to explain that other than all the suffering that was in World War II produced this moment in time that was the only moment ever could have been for Israel to get back and be a country again. It's one of the most profound theological prophecies, one of the most alerting signs of the second coming of Christ is that Israel is now a country. Now, it's not the Israel of the tribulation times yet, because it's a secular, completely secular state. There's no religion exalted. God's not mentioned in the Israeli Constitution. It's a completely secular state. But there were very few Jews living there in 1940, and now there's 8 or 9 million living there. They've been regathered, and at some point in time, they're going to be the Israel that the end times talks about. They're not there yet, but it's been rebirthed. Well, all that human suffering brought about something absolutely miraculous and important to eschatology. I don't know how to go about that. Sorry. Next thing is, even though God did not answer any of Job's questions, nor solve the riddle of why do evil things happen, Job was completely satisfied with God's response. You and I want answers. I'm an answer-seeking person. Almost all my Bible study is generated by some question I can't answer. All since I was a teenager, it's been a question comes up and I go search it out. Question comes up and I searches it out. And all my Bible searching over time has been answering questions in my mind. So questions aren't necessarily a bad thing. They lead us to truth. But in this situation, God didn't answer any of them. But Job leaves completely satisfied in what God presents to him. And the result is, of course, all these blessings come. Now, this is a statement that's going to bother some of you, I think. I don't know. It's a disturbing statement. But in some way that we cannot fully comprehend, the presence of evil, sin, suffering, and loss fulfill the plans of God. In terms of answering the theodicy question, were you here last week when I made up the word theodicy in the way? Yes. I'm working on these jokes. I whittle them down to a fine point. It answers the question in terms of how can we embrace this paradox that we can't totally satisfy. It's because in some way we can't fully comprehend it all serves God's purpose. Okay, let's take a moment and see if we have any questions. And those of you who are on live stream, I'll try to repeat the question if we actually have any, so you can hear it. Anybody got a question that you want to play around with? Yes, sir.
Is there any indication how long Job was going through this process?
His question was, for those online, is there any indication how long Job is going through this process? And I don't know the indication, other than it probably seemed like forever to him. It could have all happened so rapidly. The first ones, we don't know how long his disease or his body affliction happened, but it has the impression of it's a pretty short-term thing. It's bang, 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 bang. Then that happens, and he sits there, he gets counseled because his buddies can't hang around for 16 years talking to him. It's a I would say months or a year altogether. So for those like Josh with long-term struggles, it's a little different thing, but this is a focus of intensity. That's the focus of that. Ed?
Would you say the book of Job was written by Job?
Transcribed by, shared by Job in some way. Job is called the author by some experts, and then some people say, no, he's not the one who actually wrote it, but he shared it. It's considered the oldest book in the Bible, older than Genesis. It's the oldest book, but it wasn't written down because it was an oral book. It wasn't written down until afterwards, but because it mentions dinosaurs, it's got to predate the flood. The Leviathan and the Behemoth, those are either really, really nasty creatures that we've never seen before, or they're dinosaurs. Or at least they're dinosaur-like, the Behemoth and the Leviathan. And Job mentions them as a contemporary. Like when he says it, people must know what it is. He's not saying, here's a Leviathan, let's discuss it for a while, and it's God presenting it to Job. So the impression is that the story of Job takes place maybe even prior to the flood, I don't know, but dinosaurs were around, or some kind of creatures like dinosaurs were around, or extremely big rhinoceroses and really, really vicious elephants. Something big and nasty was walking around at the time. Yes?
Why do you think Job's friends did this to him and it still happens today when something does happen to someone, there's sometimes an indication that it is because you were wrong with God and that's why that thing is happening to you?
The question is, why do we think that Job's friends took the approach that because this is happening to you, it indicates something's wrong between you and God? One of the reasons is I think it's human nature to judge other people. So we look for flaws rather than look for positivity. So when something goes wrong for somebody, I don't even want to use the word delight, but we are drawn towards finding the fault and being able to assign blame, so that in some way we can either feel better about ourselves or remove the fear that something might happen bad to us because we're not doing what we think they're doing, so we're okay. There's some psychological thing at play, and God knows that about us, which is why I think He recorded all that, so we can hear those complaints come up. And some of them seem pretty logical. Some of them, there's actually some pretty good rebukes by his friend about pride and self-reliance, and you had it easy, and now you're griping when something goes bad. There's some valid points they make, but they were all off. What God was saying, this has literally nothing to do with Job. This is about me and Satan. What you think about that, that changes the whole nature of the story. Job is just a character in this dialogue, in this debate, in this issue between God and Satan. So in our lives, there's a horizontal, contemporary, immediate purpose. There's a long-range, other circle out there purpose. But there's a vertical purpose that we often will never, ever know until maybe we can get to heaven. But I think it's human nature for us to want to find a reason, and it's usually a bad reason. Yes, sir?
The Job's friends, approaching from that perspective, really didn't change throughout the time of God's word being revealed, because we get down to the Gospel of John, and the disciples ask, who sinned? Did this man or his parents, the one who was blind sitting at the gate of the temple? So that question persisted, that suffering must be the result of sin or something that you have done wrong. But now, with us, with the complete revealed word of God in our hands, we can view it from a somewhat different perspective than where those questions sprung from.
It's a little too long to repeat to the live stream people, but what Jim was saying was that then 1,000 years later, when Jesus is alive, the same perspective is there, that the man who was born blind had to be because of sin. And it wasn't just the same perspective, it actually had intensified. It had become entrenched in Jewish thought that God, when sin and hardships come, it's because you're being judged by God. That's why they began to associate the rich with being spiritual. So by the time of Jesus' life came, the Pharisees, the scribes, and the religious leaders of the day who had affluence and money and health, they were able to exalt themselves as being truly spiritual, while the poor peasants were peasants and poor because something was wrong with them and God. So when Jesus comes in to minister, who does he go to? He goes to the poor. To show them, first of all, that's the wrong concept. But now, we know that. We have the New Testament. We have Jesus' words. 2,000 years later, we're still doing it to people. Okay, what's wrong with you and God? Did you do something? Did that happen? We still do it. It's just, we're nasty creatures. We're like, if you can't feed on food, we'll feed on each other. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, with Job's cursing his wife and his bird, wasn't that in essence cursing God? Or what would be cursing God?
Well, I think cursing God would have been actually literally to curse God and say, I wish something about you. But whatever he did, God gave him grace and didn't judge him for it because God understands the limits of human nature. You know, back in the early church, they had struggles during the Roman persecutions when Christians would recant their faith under torture, and then they wouldn't be killed. And the church was in a huge debate as, should we let them back in the church when they recanted their faith under torture? Their eventual answer, now the immediate answer was they would bring them into like a probationary membership and watch them for a while to see. But the eventual answer was, yes, we have to, because the body and the soul has a limit to what it can. We can face death. It's torture we have a hard time with. And anybody who's ever talked to a POW who's been tortured, they'll tell you everybody breaks. There's at some point, everybody will break and say anything. And evidently, it's like 13 seconds under waterboarding. And you get waterboarded, all sorts of things go flying out of your mouth. Because we're very limited. Well, God understands that and knows that. So I think if Job, if he even would have said something against God, God would understand that's not the cry of his spirit. That's the cry of an anguished soul. But he didn't actually do that, so we don't really know for sure. I don't think God is perturbed by the fluctuation in our emotions or our anger that comes from being bewildered. Especially, I think that person will quickly draw back to God when that anger has been expressed and their soul, spirit is now empty, and they'll look up to the one who fills them, and that faith will be immediately restored. Doesn't mean they lose their salvation and get it back, but it means that the vibrancy of their faith returns because it doesn't die. If you're truly born again, it might go down to an ember, but it's going to flame back up. I guess that's my theology. All right, well, hey, it's 10 till 8. Let's go ahead and close off with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this amazing story of Job, and we just quickly went over it, but there's just so many things we can learn from it and apply to our own lives. I pray that you'll help us do that we might have deeper faith than just the frivolous, God is good, He wants to give us good things, and we can prosper and take dominion kind of faith that is so prevalent today. But prepare ourselves for hardships, the way that Christians throughout church history have had to do, when they were hunted and declared illegal and enemies of the state and arrested and tortured and publicly executed. And their only offense was refusing to give up their Bible, refusing to give up their faith, hiding Jews, that they pay the ultimate price. Father, help us to have a different perspective than just we deserve good stuff. Help us be willing to accept the difficult as well as the blessings. We ask that in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.